A beautifully painted gladiator miniature. You only need two to have a compelling-looking game, set in ancient Rome. And we have plenty of images of gladiators from antiquity from which we can use to paint our miniatures. This artwork, known as the Gladiator Mosaic, dates from the 4th century and depicts about a dozen different gladiators who are all named. And this one from Spain shows a classic match between a retiarius and a secutor. The retiarius was armed with a net and trident, while the secutor is heavily armored, but is hampered by a helmet with only 2 small eye holes. We have a surviving example of a secutor helmet. This small terracotta statuette of a secutor shows how the helmet resembles a fish head. Appropriate, as the secutor versus retiarius battle was meant to mimic a fisherman fighting a fish. We know quite a bit about several types of gladiators. This helmet was traditionally worn by a murmillo. But when we were deciding which gladiator miniatures we would use to create our vision of ancient Rome, this miniature caught our eye. It did not look like any gladiator we had seen. So we decided to find out who he was and how we should paint him. He is called the Crupularius. Matt is going to paint this Crupularius from V&V Miniatures. We will examine the historical sources that informed his choices on what it should look like. His first decision is whether the metal armor should be iron or bronze.
So we're gonna be painting up all of the armor in this color. This particular gladiator doesn't, I mean, we don't know almost anything about him, but from all the reenactors I've seen and a lot of the media that does depict him, he's in purely iron, not any of the decorative kind of bronze or brass. So all of his metal is going to be getting this color.
What color are you using?
So this is Broadsword silver. You can really use any silver you want. I just used this here. It's essentially a speed paint for metallics because it covers really easily and really quickly. So it's my starting color, but the actual color doesn't really matter. You can just use any kind of dark silver you want. But I do like it just because it's sometimes hard to apply metallics and not get them to be really gloopy, and this one never has that problem. I think that was the right choice to do steel.
If you look on the internet, it seems that some people would agree. This AI-generated image from Reddit shows the gladiator wearing iron armor. But there is not much hard evidence on the internet about the Crupulari. What there is tends to show reenactors in modern reconstruction of the armor. The Wikipedia entry is only 4 short paragraphs. But even though it's quite scant, the authors seem to be quite definitive in their description of Crupularius' armor. It bases this on one short passage from the famed Roman historian Tacitus. He mentions them when describing a rebel Gallic army from the year 21 CE.
There were 40,000, 1/5 armed like our legionaries. The rest had spears and knives and other weapons used in the chase. In addition were some slaves who were being trained for gladiators, clad after the national fashion in a complete covering of steel. They were called Crupularii, and though they were ill-adapted for inflicting wounds, they were impenetrable to them.
Tacitus continues describing the battle and refers to the men in mail, which are presumably the Crupularii.
The men in mail were somewhat of an obstacle, as the iron plates did not yield to javelins or swords. But our men, snatching up some, beat down the unwieldy mass, pikes and forked poles. They were left lying on the ground, without an effort to rise, like dead men.
If Tacitus is to be believed, Matt's choice of depicting the miniature's armor as iron or steel would be a good choice. But what about the greaves covering the legs of the gladiator? Bronze or iron?
Now the real question, do you think he'd look better with bronze greaves or with metal like everyone seems to show?
No.
There's no evidence one way or the other.
Well,
You know what? We are going to give him bronze greaves because I think it's more fun. So we'll show you 2 kinds of metal here. The other kind, again, you can really replace this with your chosen bronze. I find it's easiest to start with speed paint Hoplite Gold. It's not going to take very long to get my coat going for it.
So you got one coat.
Oh yeah, one coat every time. I think I end up with bronze for the greaves and some bronze details because I just think back on those 19th century paintings you see of gladiators that everyone knows, and they're just head to toe in bronze, and it's really striking. It's what people think of, and I think this guy just needed a little bit more than just to be all steel. So I'm ending up with that. Okay, looks like the bronze is probably just about set. So that's what we're looking at so far.
How do we know if this gladiator even had greaves on his legs? Tacitus tells us nothing about what the armor looked like, but a possible answer can be found in the north of France. In the small town of La Fère, on the Rue de General de Gaulle, you will find this modest-looking museum. The Musée Jeanne d'Abbeville holds the art collection of a local countess from the 19th century. Among its treasures, you can find this. Found in 1974 at an archaeological excavation of a Roman site at the nearby town of Versigny. This small statuette was dated to the 1st century CE. The figure appears to be completely covered in armor, including greaves on his legs. The head is totally encased in a helmet with air holes, offering only limited vision. If this is a gladiator, then he would be an underbatar, meaning a gladiator that fights without sight, is similar to the secutor. The lines on the torso could be a simple representation of the Roman legionnaire armor, known as lorca segmentata, shown on this statuette of a Roman legionnaire in the British Museum. It is an intriguing sculpture. There is certainly a weight of circumstantial evidence pointing to it being a representation of a crupellaris. It was found in an area of ancient Gaul. Archaeologists date it to the 1st century CE, and its armor appears to mimic legionnaire armor. All of these appear to fall in line with Tacitus's writing, but in the end they are all circumstantial. We have nothing that definitively states that this figure is an actual crupellaris. Our sources also do not tell us if the crupellaris wore any clothing under his armor. How will Matt portray the cloth areas of the miniature?
We're set here for the medals for now. I'm going to end up coming back to them, but first we're going to move on and do some of the cloth on him. I end up painting the padding as this sort of whitish, almost like a gambeson, medieval gambeson, and that's just because I'm thinking it's just going to be an undyed fabric. I mean, theoretically, you can dye any of these things, and we see gambesons like that in medieval Europe with colors, but I think it's a great contrast here. So there's a little artistic license, and I think it's very reasonable to expect that it would be that color. All the reenactors I ever see, they're wearing that. I think for the clothing that you can just see a little clothing under him in the front and back. I'm going to end up with a really bright color, something that's a reasonable natural dye, but something that's really going to draw the eye. And I think this kind of jade color I'm going to work with is good in that it's really bright, but it also, artistically, it's going to match in with some of the colors that I think I'll use later on the strapping. It'll be complementary, but it's also something that if you're a spectator in the stands and you're looking down at this tiny speck of a guy moving around, you want a really bright color to catch your eye, and I think this does that. And we're just gonna give it, there's so little here to highlight. Normally I would do a little bit more, but for this guy, just to have it show up at all, we're gonna have just little strokes of jade color in any area that might get a middling amount of sun. So I've just left the darkest recess in that center there in that much darker jade color.
In choosing a bold color for the clothing, Matt is connecting his miniature to another artist who painted dramatic historical subjects. Jean-Léon Gérôme was a renowned French artist from the 19th century. He created one of the most well-known paintings of a gladiator. His painting, titled Pollice Verso, which is Latin for "with a turned thumb," arguably gave birth to the idea that giving the thumbs down at the gladiatorial games signaled death for a defeated gladiator. All of Jerome's paintings, whether of historical subjects like the assassination of Julius Caesar or Napoleon in Egypt, or of exotic locations, all use dramatic compositions and striking colors. Pollice Verso was no exception. The moment of high drama in the arena is accentuated by the shiny bronze armor and colorful tapestries. It remains such a striking image that Ridley Scott used it as inspiration for his film, Gladiator. He recalls,
That image spoke to me of the Roman Empire in all its glory and wickedness. I knew right then and there I was hooked.
Jerome's imagination was so inspired by this painting that he sculpted a life-sized version of the two gladiators. Matt's choice of a bright color for the clothing on his Crupularius appears to draw on the history of artful depictions of gladiators. Vibrant colors speak to the fact that gladiators were entertainers as well as athletes. He must now paint the straps that bind the gladiators' miniature armor.
And I pick a pretty bright color, both because I don't think we have an enormous amount of evidence for what color it would be, but I do note that a lot of the evidence we do have of the gladiators is that they're pretty vibrant, because you're seeing them from some great distance away as a spectator. So you want to have that show of seeing all their movement, and picking a bright color seems probably right. So I imagine they probably would have anyway. And it's a lot easier for us on the tabletop and more dramatic to pick a light color for that too. So I've picked a complementary color to this jade that we have, which is a slightly desaturated red. And we're going to hit all those chords. And I'm not going to worry too much about highlighting it a lot. The chords are so small. I'm essentially just picking what I would normally use as a mid-tone and just going to tap in all that detail. We can see just how much adding that has really defined the leg and his back here, where we've added that color and it's really sectioning it off really well and made the model more interesting overall, especially for a model that has so few components to it. It's all armor and just a tiny bit of cloth. This is it's really helping to separate it and draw the eye in a little better.
There is a blending of informed and artistic choices in Matt's portrayal of the Crupularius. What are we to make of it as a representation of what a true Crupularius would have looked like? We reached out to Carl, our resident ancient scholar, for his perspective on this.
What I love about what Matt did here is that he was engaging in a little bit of history himself. He was doing some interpretation of the evidence. And based off both what he read and what he saw from the material artifacts, he created this really imaginative version of what a Crupularius might have looked like. And I think that's really cool. It raises the question of what can we actually learn? How can we even begin to interpret sources? And can we even say that this is truly a guy that existed? The big thing is that in the ancient world, the evidence that we have is 90% text that is written by Roman aristocratic sources. Powerful elite people in Roman society who are trying to tell you things from their point of view. And the other source of evidence we have is physical artifacts, material culture from the time of the Romans. So I think what's awesome about Matt's interpretation, his creation of this Crupularius, is that it took both Tacitus's viewpoint on this figure and a piece of material culture, which we don't actually know what that is, and created something wholly original that feels in the spirit of what the sources are. I always, try to tell my students, it's not like the US Civil War where you can get the viewpoints of everybody, from women to the people on the margins to the common soldier. With the Romans, we're kind of limited in what we have. So everything we do is a big leap of faith, and we have to just go off the best evidence that we have access to. And I think Matt's done a tremendous job doing that. Painting miniature figures of ancient warriors is one of the coolest parts of this hobby, I think, because in a way you have to delve into the past in order to even figure out where to begin.
What we've ended up with here, with the steel and the bronze and the cloth on this guy, maybe with just a little bit of artistic license. I think in general that this is probably what a realistic gladiator might have looked like. And I think that I'm being done a lot of favors by V&V Miniatures that themselves did a lot of research into what this guy should have looked like.
If you would like to see how the Crupularius fares in the arena, join us for our live stream of Blood on the Sands on February 13th, or watch the archived video. Let us know in the comments if you like this style of video, and what other periods or miniatures you would like to see. Please give this video a like, and we look forward to seeing you again.